1997. He was lecturing on terrorism and weapons of mass destruction with Senator Lugers and Nunn. And, to make that assertion about terrorist states tells you the state of the technology. It's because terrorist states aren't known for high science, number one, and the components that are required are essentially, off the shelf. So I think we do need to be concerned. These are the very concepts that Tesla was concerned about, when he started making his breakthroughs. Hey, you could do all this stuff. He made the assertion you could cause the Earth to ring like a bell and, create a earthquake of unbelievable magnitude. But these kinds of ideas, as they're being advanced by military planners, the thing is you don't see them. They're not like a bomb going off. You can create these kinds of events and have absolute plausible deniability unless your adversary has the same technology and can run the right instruments to detect the signals.
So is that part of what's going on, that once the technology has been out there and it's already being used by the United States, or it's being used by Russia, and it's being used by Norway, and now it's in Europe, and in other words, it's now, quote, fair game. So now it's going on not just here, but it's going on internationally, the same type of abuses to the ionosphere. How can anybody have a climate change conversation and say, yes, it may be humans involved, but this is the humanity that's involved?
Well, it could very well be. And the reality, when you look at contributors to greenhouse gases, 97 to 99% of that is natural, and only 1% is man-made. And natural in the form of decaying plant matter and organic matter, as well as volcanic eruption and all the things that contribute to greenhouse gases.
Sure.
Man doesn't contribute the vast majority. Shut off everything man does, nature can mess it up with one variance in its normal cycle.
What do you have to say about the fact that this technology is in many parts of the world and is occurring, and there's no discussion of it on a global level about how it's not only altering weather and can alter weather as a weapon, but it is cooking and it is ruining a protective shield that we need on this earth for living well?
Yeah, well, at a minimum, it's producing a risk that the world, no one has franchise on. The world needs to be involved in assessing that risk in the open light of day and eliminating unnecessary challenges. For instance, if you could figure it out someday, and we're way, way, way away from that day, but if you could figure it out and manipulate geophysical factors with clear understanding of all of the side consequences and be able to for instance, solve the ozone issues if those are truly issues, solve the pollutant issues if they're truly issues, and moderate temperature, well, that's all interesting, but we're in kindergarten with a hand grenade, and it's being done by a military and an academic complex, and not in the open light of day, but in a very different kind of model.
Yeah, the paradigm is that Earth is their lab.
Yeah, exactly right. In fact, they've said it. It's like a plasma lab in the sky. And Eastland, on the weather modification stuff he was doing at the end of his life in the last several years, he viewed it as he wasn't giving any of it to the military. His view of it was, if this was ever going anywhere, it was going to happen in the open light of day with a whole lot of people involved and absolute open science, or he wasn't participating. And, he had plenty of options in his life. Really brilliant people do. And my relationship with Eastland was a good one. And I got to say, he was a very ethical guy, and he had certain ideas that had absolute positive implications, and others that he looked at as having positive and negative applications and had to be looked at very carefully, if at all. In fact, he did a lecture. We have it posted on our website. It's free, and people can go there and download it and look at it. It's about an hour of Eastland talking about some of his big picture concepts and in terms of positive, negative applications and uses. And and I think he had some really brilliant ideas in several fronts, not just in this area, but the risks also he began to understand. And what he said to me, and he began to publish in all of his material, is because we never created a villain out of him. We looked at him as, hey, he's a scientist doing what he thinks is great work, and it is in his field, but without necessarily understanding the implications within other fields. And and that was his eye opener, was that we really needed more multidisciplinary approaches to science to make sure what we're doing in one field doesn't, in fact, affect something else in some contrary way. In the case of HAARP, it's the energy signals that can override signals within our minds and within our bodies that can cause, on a very large scale, serious issues, either deliberately or as a side effect. And in either case, those of us who become the experimental subjects at least need to weigh in.
This actually can alter subatomic particles, too.
Yes. I mean, we're talking about manipulating energy at its essence and causing, changes, that are quite profound on several different levels. And this is, again, why today, and I think that's where we continued the work in the Earth Rising series, which are about mixed technologies, and then later controlling the human mind, which we consider to be the realm of neuroscience and what's happening there. As science sort of merges, you have computer science and biological sciences and other sciences merging in a way that is unprecedented in at least our understanding of human history. And as a consequence, the rate of change. Every bit of technology from the invention of the wheel to where we are at this moment is going to double in about 9 months. And continue to double at that rate and a shortening rate. You
remind me of Ray Kurzweil with the law of accelerating returns.
Well, and it's what happens. And so at that rate of change, very little gets looked at properly, at least in its full context, before the next thing. I mean, you go from theoretical science to a product on the shelf in a year, whereas in the old days it was 100 years, to get a concept to even move forward enough to make it into a reality. On that level. And so, that kind of acceleration, that kind of change, and even shorter, if you're really bent on, getting something out and getting an understanding, that's a big deal. And that's why this kind of science, when we're talking about literally plugging into the environment itself and using it as part of your machine, that should have a little more discussion. I think most of us on the planet recognize the infancy of science and the change of science. Scientific models about every 50 years in the last 500 have had some dramatic changes, and particularly in the last couple hundred. Since academics have ruled the roost in terms of what are considered creative and inventive, as opposed to just sort of coming from wherever it came from.
How do you protect yourself from radiation around you with antennas for cell stations?
You don't. The main thing is to maintain strong physiological systems, our own health, the diets we take in, the things we do to degrade our immune systems, all of these things that weaken us, weaken our coherence, if you will. Fear and anxiety. I mean, if you look at brainwave activity in those states, it's incoherent brain patterns that you get. If you look in any of the higher states of consciousness, those signals are quite coherent, rhythmic, types of signals that sort of slow down, create a very strong physiological body that actually has an electrical component that can be measured in a number of different ways. And so healthy systems, most of these signals are weak at a distance, which means your body will gravitate to the stronger signal. It will ignore it as background noise in many cases. Strong signals close in are more difficult to deal with. So that's the power grid that surrounds you, the cell phones you stick next to your head. These you can't do much about except avoid them or take control of them in a more deliberate way.
What do you do?
Well, I don't use a cell phone, number one. As busy as I am, I've gotten through 51 years without having to have one. With the one exception, if I travel to lecture, I get one of those pay-as-you-go phones for my daughters to reach me in case they have a problem. But besides that, I don't use them. And most things don't require such an emergency as I can't wait to call at a landline, and I've structured my life accordingly. When you think about the power grid itself, it's pretty much unavoidable. You do things to maintain your own health. And if people who've met my wife and I, we're in our 50s, and most people think we're in our 30s. So, we live a healthy life and have strong systems from it. But the other part of it is where we live. Our water, if you measure our water for pH and for microvolts, it's a minus 60 microvolts and a pH of about 7.7, 7.8, which is extraordinary for,
Wow.
And that's, And I've measured much better water than that in our region. And we don't take the sun in the dosages most